I'm going to need around 500 sleepers for the new railway. 500 sleepers. So, should I make them from recycled plastic or from timber or from concrete? That's the question. There are pros and cons for each option, of course, but before we look at those for timber sleepers, let me show you these wonderful things. They are ferns growing in the moss that's growing on the trees. And when plants grow in these conditions, they're called epiphytes. Now, epiphytes are interesting because obviously they don't have their roots in the ground, and they're not parasitizing the trees, so they're not getting the water that they need from the tree or from the ground. They're getting it from the moisture in the air and from the rain that so often falls here. Now, mosses and lichens are common enough growing as epiphytes, but big ferns like these are not common at all. You might find them in tropical rainforests, but we're hardly in the tropics here. So what are they doing growing on our trees? You see, we live in a temperate zone. Temperate zones are the zones outside the tropics, but not so far away that they get really cold. Now, this is a very crude map, and this is a more accurate one that takes account of actual temperatures. And we are here in Ireland. So we're not in a tropical rainforest, but we are in a temperate rainforest. Or at least we would be if people hadn't cut down all the trees. There have been at least 3 mass deforestation events in Ireland since the last ice age, and now we're left with very few trees and no original rainforest at all, sadly. But it would grow back in no time if it had the chance. And it would look like this again, all drippy and verdant and rich with species. That's because, although we don't have the trees any longer, we do still have the rainforest climate, warmish and very wet. And that's actually quite rare. Here's a map of temperate rainforest areas. See, not much of them around the world. And even this is optimistic. We're on the west side of Ireland, on the Atlantic seaboard, but even a few hundred miles away, or even 100 miles away, in the middle, or on the east of the country, they'd have far less rain than we have. And of course, we're getting more and more rain every year here, on average, according to our meteorological service and my mud meters, which is exactly why I'm no longer a commercial beekeeper. Anyway, the point of all that stuff is to put some background, some context to the question of wooden railway sleepers. Context, people, context! Because the same wet and mild conditions that suit epiphytes and trees and mushrooms also suit the funguses that rot timber. Which means that although timber grows very quickly here, it also rots away very quickly too. So if I used timber straight from the sawmill to make up my sleepers, they might last a year or two and then start getting soft, and soon they would be too soft to hold up the rails, and then I'd have to replace them all. I'm talking about untreated timber there, but in fact I treated all the timber sleepers I've used so far with creosote, which is obviously toxic and poisonous. Nasty stuff. And it has to be toxic and poisonous and nasty, otherwise it wouldn't work. It has to kill off all the molds and the funguses that eat dead timber. And of course some of that creosote wood preservative ends up in the soil too. And that's not good, except despite that, the vegetation does seem to be growing just fine near the wooden sleepers, so it can't be working that well actually, thinking about it. Now traditionally, wooden railway sleepers were boiled in a truly toxic soup of creosote that killed everything in the neighbourhood, probably including the railway workers themselves. And even then, they all rot away in the end. Now I can hear some of you saying, ballast to all that. Raise the whole railway up on a bank of stones and the sleepers will stay dry and won't rot. Well, now there are 3 reasons against that idea. One reason, Sandra, my lovely wife, doesn't want a raised bank in her field. She sees it as a potential hazard for the children and the animals in there. 2, it would cost a fortune in stone. I mean thousands, literally thousands. And 3, it wouldn't work. For the same reason the ferns can grow on the trees, the stones would only rarely dry out, so vegetation would grow up through them in no time and the rails would soon be grown over anyway. And people will be saying, I need to add some weed suppressing membrane underneath the sleepers, but experience shows that quickly gets grown over too from the sides. Very soon it's worse than before because that membrane starts disintegrating into the ground. By the way, overgrown rails aren't really a problem. Some grazing before I use them and the wheels cut through the grass pretty well. Okay, so those are the cons to wooden railway sleepers. The pros, the advantages are cost and availability. They would be the cheapest option by far. So, that's one option, timber plus wood preservative. What do you think? Should I go with them? Thank you so much to all of you who chipped in big and small amounts to get this project off the ground. You're all brilliant. Honestly, we couldn't keep doing what we do without our Patreons. And this project in particular is going to depend on some generosity from you lot, or the rails will run out before I reach the muck heap. That wouldn't be any good, would it? No, Tim.